Hey, this is Crystal Cox from 31 Threads. Today we're going to be making the classic 9-patch. Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you're sewing along with me today. We're going to be making a baby girl quilt and we're going to be using the classic 9-patch pattern. I've chosen to use this off-white color with this blush pink color, which is from the new Riley Blake fabric line, Blush and Butterscotch. You don't have to use the background as a light. You can actually have your background be the darker color and have the pattern that goes through it in the lighter fabric. Either way, you just need two contrasting fabrics. This quilt will finish at 38 by 53. Let's get started. The 9-patch is one of the simplest patterns to make. And this right here is actually a 9-patch block. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you have 9 small squares that make up this block right here. It's very versatile. You can use it in dozens of ways. You could actually make an entire quilt with these squares. You could do it 2 colors. You could have multi-colors. You could switch out the colors throughout the quilt. But this pattern right here is called a simple iris chain. And this quilt is made by using this block right here, the 9-patch, with a solid block right beside it. So if you alternate a solid block, a 9-patch, a solid block, and a 9-patch, and then you reverse it on the next row, you will have this pattern right here, which is called a simple iris chain. And that's going to be the pattern that we're making today. This pattern comes from All People Quilt online. It's a free pattern. You can see on this pattern that they've used the background as the darker color and the chain, the iris chain that's made, is with the lighter colors. On this quilt that I've made, the background is the lighter colors and the pattern is made with the darker colors. You can download this at All People Quilt. It has the directions for it and then it shows you how to put the rows together. Now we're going to be strip piecing this. We're getting ready to cut our fabric in just a moment. And when we do the strip piecing, if you look closely, I have a white strip, a blue strip, and a white strip. And then over here is the alternate. It's a blue strip, a white strip, and a blue strip that we will subcut once we're finished to make our squares. It's a lot quicker than cutting out individual squares. This will make a lot more sense once we get started sewing. Before starting any project, the first thing you need to do is really press your fabric well. The creases that are in the fabric will prevent you from being able to cut the fabric evenly. So press out all of the creases before you cut anything. Once you have pressed out most of the creases, then you are ready to start cutting. Now that you're ready to start cutting, the things that you're going to need are a cutting mat. This is a self-healing mat, and I purchased this at Walmart. It was the cheapest price that I could find, cheaper than Amazon or any of the big box stores. And you can see it's two-sided, so you can cut on either side. This one is 24 by 36, and while I have a larger one, this is the one I use for most projects. You will also need a ruler, and I can say that once you begin quilting, you will literally want all the rulers, but if you just need one to get started with, I think the one that I have used the most and continue to use the most is 6 inches by 24. When your fabric is folded, if you have a 24-inch ruler, it will go all the way through the length of that or the width of that, and I just use it for just about everything. This right here is simply something that I stuck on there to make it easier when I'm trying to pick up the ruler. I think I got it from the Dollar Tree for 2 or 3 in a pack for $1. You will also need a rotary cutter. Now these are both Olfa, and the best price I got on those was from Amazon. I also order my blades from Amazon. You don't have to have an Olfa cutter, but I really do like it. I have the 60 millimeter and the 45 millimeter. It's important to keep a fresh blade in your cutter. I just replaced this morning. Once it gets dull, it will start to kind of eat the fabric on the end and not cut it very well. So at least every other project, if not every project, I try to replace the blade in the cutter. So now that we're ready to begin cutting, we want to start by squaring up our fabric so that our strips will be even. We won't have an elbow in them. That's not my sharp cutter. I'm gonna use this one. This one has a brand new blade. It will cut much better. All right, and we're gonna be cutting 3-inch strips. Now, there are 2 ways you can use this ruler. You can do what I'm doing and actually line the ruler up on the line down here and line the ruler up there. That would look like this right here. That's going to be 1, 2, 3 inches. The second way that you can use this ruler is that you can measure the 3 inches from this side, like this right here, and cut along that way, which for me would mean cutting from this side. And so since I'm already working on this side, I'm going to use the ruler like this. By placing a weight at the end of your ruler, it won't move on you when you are cutting up the strip. Now that we're ready to begin sewing, I have a cream colored strip and I have the pink strip that I'm going to sew together. The pink strip, it's easy to see what is the right side and what is the wrong side. It's a little bit harder on this cream color, but if you look closely, you can see that there are some small like polka dots that are a little bit lighter color. So you have to look very closely to be sure that you are sewing right sides together. I've got that ready, right sides together, and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam. Now, I have, to make it easier, I have a 1/4 inch foot on my machine. And so if I make sure the fabric is lined up on the side of that silver foot right there, then I'm going to have exactly a 1/4 inch seam. So after you have sewn the first 2 strips together, you're going to press your seam. And I learned very early on from watching Donna Jordan on Jordan Fabrics that you do want to press down as much as possible and not iron back and forth, and so that you don't distort your seam and mess it up, make it crooked. So thank you, Donna. That has been a well-learned lesson. And so the easiest way to do it, or you can, first of all, you have 2 ways you can press this. You can open it up and press the seams completely open. That would look kind of like this right here. Let's see if I can get that open. Or you can press the seams to one side. If you do that, which is a lot easier, typically people will, whenever possible, press to the dark side so that you don't see the seam through their lighter fabric. So to press to the dark side, you'll put the dark fabric on top, just lift it open, and as you peel it back, take your iron and gently press back on it. By doing it that way, I'm very easily going across it so I don't distort the seam and I keep it straight, but the seam is going to be on the dark side so that you won't see it on this lighter fabric. Now that we have pressed that, we're going to put another cream colored strip on this side, and then I'll show you how to cut the pieces, to subcut. Once you've sewn your strips together, alternating pink, cream, and pink with cream, pink, and cream, You will then cut those into smaller strips that look like this. Now I'm cutting mine into 3-inch strips because that's the size I want for this particular quilt. You can, and so I started out with 3-inch strips. When I sewed the 3-inch strips together, I'm then going to subcut those into 3-inch smaller strips. Depending on what size you begin with will be the same size that you cut those into. So once I have cut those, I'll cut the whole strip set. Just line that up real quick. I will cut the whole strip into smaller sections. And then once it's all cut up into these small sections, I can then begin to assemble the 9 square, the 9 block. So now what's left to do is to sew this together. And when that's done, I will have a square that looks like this. So much simpler and so much quicker than cutting individual squares and sewing them all together. So let's get all of these cut, all of these sewn into squares, and I'll show you what's next. When I'm ready to sew the small strips together, again we're going to sew right sides together. When I make the seam there, I want to line this up so that these seams nest. If you remember when we were pressing these, we pressed to the dark side. So the seam on the back will be away from the cream toward the pink. When I go to put 2 pieces together, 2 small strips together, these seams, if you notice, will nest together. And that's how I'm going to line them up so that my points and my lines will match. Once you get those exactly where you want those, then you want to put a pin in there to keep it and hold it in place. I like these really tiny thin pins because if you need to, if you can't keep them in place without sewing over them, these really small ones you can actually sew together. I'm sorry, you can sew across is what I meant to say. So you want to pin it in such a way that you catch this part and then the other part that you're nesting to it. So my pin will go through kind of at an angle so that I catch both of them. Now, if one side is slightly smaller or not as long as the other side, you're going to want to try to work that fullness in. And the better job you do of making your strips and cutting those evenly, the less excess fabric you should have to worry about working in. So let's go ahead and sew this together. Again, we're using 1/4-inch seams. And I'm just going to very slowly and gently sew across that pin. And I'm going to put just a little bit of tension on that because I'm trying to work a little bit of fullness on that top layer in, just so my points will match up. Okay. So when you open it, the goal is that your points will match up. And then when I press, so I'll have one more that I will sew on this side to make my block. And then this time when I press, I'm going to press the seams open. Where they are pressed to one side, if I continue to try to do that now, I'll have a lot of bulk right there. So at this point, I will press the seams open. Be careful when you're pressing that you don't distort. So just take your iron and go right down through that seam. Kind of use your finger in front of it to help open it. Now once you press those open like that, you're going to flip it over and then press from the top side. Once all of my squares are assembled and I'm ready to trim them and make sure that they're all the same size, there's a couple of different ways I can do that. If I have a ruler that is the exact size that I'm going to be making, I can lay it on top and then trim around the sides. Some of the more common sizes are the 12-inch, the 4-inch, and the 6-inch. Now because this square is going to finish at 7.5, I don't really have a 7.5-inch ruler to lay on top of this. So what I'll have to do to square it is use this ruler and use the grid marks on this to be sure that it's square. So I've placed it as much as I can in between the lines and got it as evenly as I can on this board. And I want to trim off the smallest amount to get to the smallest size that is still usable. Now this is a little tedious and it will take a little bit of time, but it matters, and it will make sewing the rows so much easier because all of these blocks will be the exact same size and you won't have to worry about your points lining up and all of that. So I just rotate mine. Another tool that makes this really handy is if you use a rotating mat. I'll show you what that looks like just in a moment. If you have the ability to invest in a rotating mat, one that will swivel, it is really useful for squaring these because you don't have to move them every time you cut off one of the sides. You can lay it on there, get it where you want it, cut that first side, and then you just swivel the mat. Do your ruler again, cut that side, swivel the mat. And because you don't have to pick it up and move it, it really makes your time go by a lot quicker. I've now got all of the blocks assembled, and I have squared them or trimmed them to where they are all 7 3/4 inches. So when I cut this coordinating block out of the cream fabric, I don't have to worry about squaring it or trimming it. I can cut it exactly to the 7 3/4 so that it matches the 9-patch squares. Now here's the fun part, is assembling the rows. We are ready to put those together into a pattern. And you can begin to see what it's going to look like. Because I'm doing a baby quilt, my rows will have 5 blocks in them, and I will have 7 rows. And then the top will just be alternating. All right, so you can begin to see the pattern taking shape, and as we add more rows, these will join so that it makes a continuous chain. Now, we will sew the rows at a time. Once all of the rows are together, then we will attach the rows to the next row. So we'll put these together and we won't have to worry about any points matching up on this because you've got a solid piece on either side of your 9-patch. So that'll be a very easy sewing all of these together. And then once you have all 7, or I have all 7 of my rows, I'll then show you how to attach those. So now that we have the blocks sewn into rows, we are going to take the rows and connect those together. Now, this is probably, for a beginner, the trickiest part. I don't want you to be discouraged. I know we said earlier that the goal is that all the points will match up inside the blocks and also within the rows. But while that's a nice and lofty goal, the truth is that none of us that put quilts together ever get to the finished product and say there's not one single mistake in that anywhere. So while the goal is that, yes, we would love for all of these to match up perfectly, the most important goal is that we have a good time, we learn while we're doing it, and we keep at it. So a finished quilt is better than a non-finished quilt, just because we keep redoing and seeking for perfection. So we have our rows and we're going to put those together. And I would just go ahead and say at this point, even if you sewed the individual blocks without using the pins, this is a place where you absolutely for sure want to use pins to put these together. So again, we're going to put right sides together just like if we were doing our individual blocks. And I'm already going to go ahead and try to line up as much as possible those seams where I want to pin those and have those come together. And then I'm going to start pinning. I usually work from the inside out. It's easier if you have some excess fabric that you need to work in. If you started in the center and as you move out, you can kind of make those adjustments where needed. Now, this is a good time to say that when you are cutting your fabric, when you are pressing your fabric, and where you are sewing your individual blocks and squaring them up, trimming them, all of those things will come together so that at this point, if you've done a good job with those, it's going to be way easier to line these up. Just getting one of those things wrong, maybe cutting your fabric not exactly even, or distorting your seams when you're pressing, or not taking the time to trim your squares and make sure those are even, that all makes it difficult to match these up. Now mine are just right on top of each other, not because I'm great or an expert, but because I've learned that the little things leading up to this point all come together to make that work. Sometimes they don't line up no matter how hard I've worked, and if that's the case and I have some excess fabric, instead of just pinning at the joints, I will pin along through here so that I can kind of work that excess fabric out evenly over the course of that block. And I may have 4 or 5 pins in here just so that when I sew that together, if there is some excess fabric, it's going to be worked out evenly in that block. So I'm going to sew the rows together, and when we come back, we are going to have a finished quilt top. And we are finished. And that wasn't too hard, was it? This quilt went together very quickly, easily, using strip piecing. I hope that if you've not tried the 9-patch, that this video will give you a little help and a nudge in that direction to give it a try. And I hope that you'll join me again soon for another Let's Make a Quilt episode. If you're not a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll be seeing you soon. Thanks.